Welcome once again, everyone, to the 2021 Newhallywood Silent Film Festival. I'm E.J. Stevens, and one of the things that we're really trying to do this year, especially since we're virtual, is to promote and to learn about some other film festivals, film societies, preservationist groups, education groups that are working to keep the art of the silent film alive. Today we have the real pleasure and honor to speak with Ned Thanhouser, who is the grandson of the founders of the Thanhouser Film Company from way back when in the good old days. And he's going to tell us about his efforts at film preservation and education, silent film preservation education. Ned, it's great to video meet you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our interview.
Yeah, thanks for making some time for us today. So to start off, tell us about who you are and your connection back to your grandparents there and their film company.
Sure. Again, I was growing up with my parents in Houston, Texas, and we had moved there from New York when I was 1 year old, so I don't remember much about New York. Mm-hmm. But my father had told me and my two sisters that my grandparents, Edwin and Gertrude, were involved in the early silent motion picture industry. It turns out that they ran a studio in New Rochelle, New York from 1909 through 1917, right at the birth of, really the commercialization of film. And my father had told me that Edwin had been given a bill for the continued storage of the nitrate film prints that were made by the company after it shut down. And Edwin thought that they were worthless. And he said, burn them. Ooh. And they did. They burned all the negatives.
Oh, that hurts.
So my father had told us that we had no surviving footage, but the negatives were burned, and every negative made 30 or 40 prints that went into distribution. And it turns out that there are hundreds of Thanhouser films that survive in archives and private collections around the globe. So after he passed away, I actually saw on a public broadcasting television show in 1986, I saw a feature from UCLA on early silent films, and all of a sudden the Thanhouser logo comes on the screen, and there is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, produced by the company in 1912. And so all of a sudden the light bulb went off. Oh, they burned the negatives and the prints survived. And so it started me on a 30+ year quest to find surviving Thanhouser films that are held in archives around the globe. And to date, I found 262 surviving prints that are at archives literally around the globe. And some of the titles are duplicated. For example, that film, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, there's 8 copies at different archives. So there's probably 165-ish unique titles. And in 1995, after I discovered all these films, I said, I think these would be of interest to cinephiles and scholars. And so I incorporated a nonprofit to do that work, the Thanhouser Company of Film Preservation, and started out releasing VHS tapes, copies of films that I obtained from archives. I had traveled around the world extensively. Part of my job at the time was to travel internationally and do business. And so the archives were very open to making copies of prints. So I would get 16mm reduction prints of films that were in their collections and put those on VHS. And then, of course, VHS is kind of dead, and it died in the mid-90s. And so I converted everything to DVD, and I now have 96 titles that are available either online or on DVD that you can find on my website, the thanhouser.org website. And the good news is that just last week, a new Thanhouser film surfaced in Norway. I got an email from some people in Norway that I've been working with at the National Library of Norway, and they have a feature film that looks to be intact. It looks to be all 5 reels from 1960
Wow.
called The Net, and it's in good condition. It's tinted, and they are working to preserve and make a digital copy of that film. And so looks like we'll have another Thanhouser DVD probably in the next year or so.
Oh, that's great. Now you said so you have roughly 100 titles that you've found. How many out of how many films did Thanhouser make over its time?
Good question. Thanhouser made 1,086 films
Okay.
in their history, which the first film was released in March of 2010. I'm sorry, 1910. And the last film was in October of 1917. If you do the math, that's 2.5 films a week.
Wow.
So they were very, very
Yeah.
They have multiple production companies making films. They started out just doing 1 a week, and then 2 a week, and then 3 a week. But in 1916, the industry was changing from the 1 reel format to feature films.
Mm-hmm.
And so Thanhouser transitioned from making the 1 reels into making feature films. They didn't make a lot of them. They made like 25 feature films, and not many of those survived. We have a couple, and again, we just found a new one, this film from Norway, and looking forward to actually seeing that film. But the complete list of films, the surviving films, and all the films that they produced are found on the Thanhouser.org website in the Research Center.
Okay.
There's a link on the front page called Research Center, and you can look in there and you can see more information than you'll ever want to know about all the films they made. And you can get links to watching some of the films online at no charge.
Now, I was reading through the history of the Thanhouser company that you had online, which was a great story. Some of the things I'd never heard before, but you were telling me that the film studio in New Rochelle, New York, was actually a skating rink originally.
That's correct. Edwin and Gertrude were living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and they had been running a acting company that was doing live performances at a theater called the Academy in Milwaukee. And then they tried to go to Chicago in 1909 to take on a bigger venue and a bigger audience. He was looking for bigger things. But he was noticing that all of his box office receipts were being taken over by these things called flickers. And so he went to New York and researched the industry and decided that he was going to go from live theater to cinema and make movies as a production company. He had a whole, shelf full of, screen-ready scripts that were from the plays that he was producing. And he knew how to put on a story, and Gertrude was a key force behind the production of the productions. And so he moved the family to New York, and he knew that the place to live at that time was up in New Rochelle, which was 45 minutes from Broadway, made famous by George M. Cohan's song. And when he landed in New Rochelle, got off the train, he had a real estate agent lined up to find a house to live in. And the agent said, well, what kind of business are you going to be in? He says, oh, I'm going to make motion pictures. I said, what do you need? I need a great big open area where I can, have lots of sets and everything. He said, well, there's an abandoned roller skating rink on the corner of Warren and Grove. And he took him to go see the roller skating rink, and he bought it, and the rest is history.
You also talk on your website about how since they were basically the big celebrities in town, New Rochelle kind of opened itself up for Thanhouser filming.
Yeah, I mean, they did a lot of productions in New Rochelle. I mean, they had production companies in Los Angeles for a while and down in Jacksonville, Florida, and they had traveling crews that went to Niagara and Yellowstone, but 80+% of the films were produced in and around New Rochelle. And so there's many local venues that appear on the film that are released. And I've been working with the New Rochelle Public Library, and they are able to identify many of the locations where they were shot. in the city.
Have they done any type of film presentation there in New Rochelle?
Yeah, I've done several things in New
Mhm.
Rochelle because it's kind of the home base of the Thanhouser company. We've done at the New Rochelle High School several programs with live accompaniment showing some of the films that were produced in New Rochelle. Plus, Iona College has reached out to me in wanting to have a Thanhouser archive. And
Oh, wow.
I had collected over the 30 plus years thousands of artifacts and films and pictures and postcards and all sorts of memorabilia. And the New Rochelle Iona College digitized all of these artifacts. And if you go to the New Rochelle, if you go to the Thanhouser website, on the front page is a link to that collection. It's very extensive, letters and postcards and portraits and information about, all the, if you will, the ephemera that was associated with Thanhouser.
Now, I saw also on your website something I thought was really neat. Was the fire department there in New Rochelle was told to, if there was a fire, to call Thanhouser so they could come and film it.
Yeah, the second phone call that was made was to the studio. And so, actors would get out in front of it and say, ham and eggs, or whatever. And then they would write a script around it.
You mentioned, and I had never heard this story, but the studio in the old skating rink burned down.
Yeah.
And Thanhouser actually filmed that and made a movie about it, right?
Well, yeah, they didn't actually film the burning of the studio. We have some still images that are on the website as well. But very auspicious day. It was January 13th, 1913 at 1300 hours. There's something for the numerologist.
You're right.
But at that time, apparently in the editing room, the volatile nitrate prints caught fire, and the studio actually burned completely to the ground. And we have photographs of that. Again, those are on the website. And it made national news because it, destroyed houses around it, and it was a huge conflagration. And so, being creative, they rented studio space in another studio nearby, and they made a film called "When the Studio Burned." And so there's a lot of smoke, but there's no long shots of the studio on fire. But there's a lot of smoke, and there's a plot behind it about saving, a baby that was supposedly locked up in the studio, and they had to rush back in to save her and all that. But, before they got the baby out, they had the film and the cameras taken out. Where the priorities were. Yeah. It's a great film, and that one's available online.
I was going to say, that's available? Okay.
Yeah, it's online. You can watch it. When the Studio Burned.
When the Studio Burned. Yeah, I'll watch that. That sounds great.
It's a great little film.
So Thanhouser, when did they got bought later by Mutual, if I remember right?
Right.
And when did your grandparents get out of the business, and when did Thanhouser close up?
Well, they got in and out of the business. They founded the studio in 1909. And then in April of 2012, they had such a success with their films. A distributor from Chicago, Mutual Film Corporation, wanted more content because they were being, slammed with, we need more footage to show to people because it was quite the phenomenon. And so Mutual approached the Thanhousers and bought them in April of 1912. Edwin my grandfather stayed on as president through the end of the year. But a guy named Charles Height, who was the lead on this, took over the studio. And at the end of 1912, Edwin and Gertrude retired, in quotes, from the business. And they left town and went to Europe. They had a no-compete clause, so they couldn't do filmmaking. But they went to Europe to research the industry, and they were in Europe 1912 and 1913 and part of 1914. And in 1914, some very tragic events happened. First off, the Archduke was assassinated. That started World War I. Edwin and Gertrude were in Europe, and along with a number of other notable people, they chartered a boat out of Genoa to cruise back to New York City to get out of the war zone. And literally the week that they landed in August of 1914, Charles Height was driving his roadster back from a meeting in New York, went off the bridge and died the next day. And so the studio was leaderless. This is again, August 1914. The investors and Mutual tried to run the company through a committee that knew nothing about filmmaking. Quality declined, people left the company. And so they reached back out to Edwin and Gertrude and said, would you please come back and save the studio with their name on it? And so in February of 1915, Edwin and Gertrude returned to run the studio on a 3-year contract with a salary that was the same as the President of the United States. They were being paid $70,000 a year to run the studio, and that was the same salary that the President was making. So it was big money for them back then.
And they were probably having a lot more fun than he was having at that time. Yeah. So when did it finally close down completely?
The industry was changing dramatically in this time frame. Everything was moving from the East Coast to the West Coast to Hollywood. And Edwin had made a small fortune running the company and had invested wisely in stock in the market. And when his 3-year contract was up in 1917, and the studio was moving, and the most famous star that Thanhouser had, Florence Labadie, was killed in an automobile accident as well. He said, I'm done. And he sold the studio assets off and retired.
So that was pretty much the end of the Thanhouser company back then, correct?
Yeah.
Now you mentioned that that you were doing other things in your life until you discovered the films and all. How did you, we heard how you got involved in this, but what was your business?
I worked for Intel Corporation.
Okay.
And spent 28 years there doing engineering and marketing roles. I did almost every job you could do there. And so I retired in 2011.
Okay.
But I had incorporated the Thanhouser company, the film preservation company, in 1995. So I had, and again, my travels with Intel took me around the globe, where I met with archive owners and found films in their collections, got copies. But when I retired in 2011, I produced a documentary film about the history of the Thanhouser company. And that film is also available on the Thanhouser website. I think it costs $5 to rent it. It's
okay.
Kind of recover some costs, but
what's the name?
55 minutes.
Okay.
And it was broadcast on Turner Classic Movies.
Oh, wow.
Okay. On their silent Sundays. Yeah, I met with their executive vice president in charge of programming, and I met him down at Telluride. We went to a film festival in Telluride, and he said, yeah, we'll show this film. So, and they actually paid me money to license the film for broadcast. So it's been there, and it's premiered at a film festival in Italy called the Pordenone Silent Film Festival, which is probably the largest gathering of silent film aficionados. I had been there several times, and we have Thanhouser programs that have shown there, showing Thanhouser films. So again, when I retired, I got really into the documentary, and then since then I've produced several more DVD collections. We have a whole 2-disc set from the Eye Film Museum over in Amsterdam, and then did a collection of films from the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress has the largest collection of existing Thanhouser films. There's like over 70 films at the Library of Congress that are identified as Thanhouser. And I started doing work again, this new film that just showed up last week.
That's like, buried treasure that's rediscovered, right?
It's amazing. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this new film.
You also mentioned to me that you have like an education stake in silent film music.
The silent films were never silent.
Right.
They were just not synchronized sound. And typically, as you know, and your viewers know, they had somebody that would be doing musical accompaniment, with the films. And so the films that we find in the archives, of course, don't have a soundtrack.
Mhm.
So to make them more enjoyable and more authentic, I would commission uh, people who are expert in silent film accompaniment. Um, and there's one gentleman that we work with that has done some marvelous work for me. His name is Nathan Avakian. He's done some, he is a phenom. He was a teenage phenom here in Portland. And so he's done a couple of accompaniments for me. He also worked with me in the silent film festival that I run for young people.
When does that take place, and what's the name and everything?
Yeah, it's called the International Youth Silent Film Festival. I co-founded that in 2010 with another gentleman named John Palanuk. He and I put this festival together with the idea of inspiring youth that are 20 years old and younger to make a silent film.
Oh, wow.
That would have to be 3 minutes or less. And we commissioned this composer, Nathan, to make 3-minute soundtracks with different themes. So there'll be themes like horror or romance or adventure, or we even have one now called noir, which has kind of a noir theme to it. And so we have 10 of those soundtracks that run 3 minutes each. And so the students are encouraged to listen to the soundtracks, pick one, and then wrap a silent film, no narration, only intertitles, and then they submit it. Now, we started this in Portland as a Northwest regional event. Since then, we've expanded. We have regional events in 2 of them in Australia, 1 in New Zealand.
Wow.
We also have one in the Midwest in Detroit. We have one in Yellowstone. And so each of those regional festivals has their own production, and they bring in the films. And then the top 3 films are submitted to an annual international competition in Portland, Oregon, where we have screened the films with live accompaniment as opposed to recorded.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a celebrity judging panel that looks at the films real time, and they select a winner, and the winner gets $5,000.
So how many people enter generally?
Well, and I don't know the numbers offhand right now, but it's in the hundreds. I know that the couple of years that we were doing it here in Portland, just the Portland regional was like 165 entries. Which
Wow.
is kind of a logistical nightmare for us, because we had to sort all these and judge them. We'd have we invite local film people to come in and watch, a dozen films, and then we combine scores, and then we pick a winner based on objective criteria. And then each of the regional competitions will do the same thing, and they'd submit their top 3 for the international show.
When would that show take place?
It happens in the May timeframe for our regional, and June is when we have the international, where all of the international entries show up. And we have people that fly in from all over the world. It's pretty amazing. People from Australia come in, they make it kind of a family vacation to support their kids.
Well, it sounds like you're doing some awesome work, and you've done some huge accomplishments. I love the idea of the young people's silent film.
It's so great to see the creative juices of these young kids in this form. 3 minutes sounds like it's not very long. It's a lot of work that these kids go into.
Sure.
What we're trying to do is get the teachers and their media labs and stuff to incorporate this in the curriculum as part of their classwork, and that's been a great success.
Well, you're doing some awesome work, because if we're going to keep this art form alive, you have to get the next generations on board. Give us the website once again for all this.
Including a link to the International Youth Silent Film Festival. Just go to www.thanhouser, THANHOUSER.org. And that's your portal to all the stuff we've talked about.
All right. Well, thanks so much. And thank you folks for watching. And we'll have some more of these talks during the 2021 Newhallywood Silent Film Festival.
Great. Be well.
You too.